In this video, we will be looking at acceptance and how we can use this to validate and normalize the human experience. What's really fascinating with acceptance when we do this is we start to deconstruct somewhat, I suppose, categories or language that we use to describe a whole experience, which can be quite distressing. So a category might be anxiety as a whole, or it might be depression as a whole, or it might be post-traumatic stress disorder as a whole, or it might be adjustment disorder as a whole, and so on and so forth. What we don't want to go out and do is get caught up in this whole approach, but rather to start pulling apart and accepting somewhat those units, those parts, those small areas within each of those experiences. So what I call this is somewhat deconstructing, I suppose, a category, or deconstructing a label. And very useful for clients. So let me show you what this looks like. What we would generally go out and find is a client would present with a particular issue. And generally speaking, most clients already have a name, have a term for what they're going out and experiencing. So let's, for this scenario, go out and call this anxiety. So a client will come in with anxiety. What occurs is they're already fused with this word. They're already experiencing all of those things that come into that experience of anxiety and so on, but they don't actually really understand it. And in actual fact, neither do I. I need more information from the client to find out what this actually means to them. So what the next step would be is, rather than going out and looking at anxiety as such, we start to go out and describe the experiences. So we move across and we want to look at what's actually inside this experience. So we want to look at the units that make up anxiety. So a client might go out and say, it's actually my heart rate increasing. They might go out and say it's sweatiness. They might go out and say it's my temperature increasing. They might say I feel quite suffocated in my throat, or pressure in my throat, some pressure on my chest. There could be dryness in the mouth, and so on and so on. There's a whole lot of experiences, and there's cognitive ones as well, where we might feel trapped, or that we're going to be sick, and so on. So what we've done is we've gone from the label to components of it. So what's happened here is we're fused with the label, and now we're starting to defuse. We're starting to pull apart the aspects of what's actually inside anxiety. Now, where I really want to focus on is the validation part. So here we've got fusion. Here we're starting to diffuse, but we're really trying to move into that acceptance model. So what happens over here is we move across. After we've understood the different components, after we've understood what is it's actually happening for our client, we start to break that category and look at the individual components without this large terminology. So we start to accept and to validate. So we would go out and look at a scenario, and let's say, for example, a client is afraid of getting onto an aeroplane. We would actually talk about how the central nervous system turns on, and when it does that, the adrenal glands begin to release adrenaline and cortisol, and when they're going out and doing that, our heart will increase, our temperature can go up, we can start to begin to sweat, our mouth begins to dry, we can feel pressure on our chest. That's very common and very normal. We usually do feel some movement in our stomach. There's a whole lot of things that can occur. So we're moving away from the fusion of I have anxiety or I experience anxiety and start to diffuse, but over here it's the validation that brings it all together. So over here we're moving into acceptance. So we're validating, plus normalise. Very important that we validate and normalise, because that's where someone can start to go and say, so it's okay for me to have this experience. So it's okay for these things to be occurring. And that is acceptance. That's what it's about. It's about allowing it to occur, allowing it to go out and happen. Now, what's really powerful in this, we want to continue with this acceptance. We want to maintain that throughout therapy. So the final step moves across, and in actual fact, we're not going out and looking at the category of anxiety anymore. We're purely saying, well, these are the symptoms, these experiences, right? And they don't even hold the normal shape anymore. They just sit there. What they do is they become something else, because what occurs is that the meaning of the label is more frightening, is more distressing than the actual individual parts. If I were to say my heart increases when I'm thinking about going onto an aeroplane, well, if I go down and do some push-ups, my heart also increases. It's quite normal to have an increased heart rate when adrenaline comes into the body. And so we start to break it down a fair bit. So we start using this language. So we continue on with the acceptance and continue using same language in session. So what we've basically gone from is really trying to get rid of anxiety. There's this big category, I'm struggling with it. I go to a bit of diffusion where I start to separate it somewhat. This is where we start really pushing into that acceptance work, where we normalise, validate, continue to use that language. And it's very normal when we're starting to say, oh, so when you go out and you see your boss, your heart starts to increase. That's pretty reasonable. How would you feel about having your heart increase while you go out and talk to him about taking a holiday with your family that's important to you? Are you willing to hold an increased heart rate for 2 minutes while you go out and discuss your family holiday with your family, with your boss? And that's what's really fascinating about this. When we break it apart, when we deconstruct it, we're talking about one at a time, and it's much more powerful. So the whole is frightening, the parts certainly aren't, or they're much more manageable. We do our acceptance work, and it starts to really, I suppose, take this impenetrable experience of anxiety into something that is much more normal and acceptable. Hope that helps. Use this with your clients. Start to pull apart their experience, whether it's depression or anxiety or whatever it might be, and you'll find that it'll start to really make some movements by just purely understanding this, not only for yourself, but most certainly for your clients. Enjoy.